Good morning. Thank you for joining. So we're going to give you the training on CTAP and ICTAP. My name is Lisette Lima, and I'll be your facilitator along with my colleague, Omira Bedward. So at this time, we're just going to go over a few housekeeping items. This class, first of all, is specifically for HR staff in the 201 and 203 series. So anybody who doesn't meet that criteria will allow some time to log off now. Please note that the training is being recorded and your attendance is considered consent. So another thing we'd like to share with you is that this PowerPoint slides are not shared, but because the training is recorded, it will be available in the next couple weeks on our VISN HR SharePoint for HR staff only, so you can look for it on the section called On-Demand Training. So also, we have a couple of our team members logged on, so if you're having any problems with the chat or the browser, just stand by for instructions from our team. And lastly, we will have a Q&A segment at the end of the session. So you'll be able to either enter your questions into the chat box, or you can come off of mute, which will allow, and you can voice your questions at this time. Okay, so we'll begin with this other note that, as I mentioned, we don't share the slides, but it's important to note that the purpose of this presentation is to provide training for our HR staff, and this is not intended to be a substitute for our VA guidance, references, or handbooks. This is just material that's developed to supplement as a complement to the topic and guidance. So again, not to be used in lieu of any guidance. And of course, when in doubt with any specific questions, always refer to either the SME of the topic or your section's leadership. Okay, so we'll get into the topic now, starting with our learning objectives. So again, this is pretty foundational. We're going to provide an overview of the federal programs for employee placement assistance and career transition. And we'll define some key terms as it relates to CTAP and ICTAP, which are surplus, displaced employee, local commuting area, and well-qualified. We'll review the program eligibility and selection priority for CTAP and ICTAP. And lastly, examine job openings, the announcements relative to the CTAP and ICTAP requirements. Okay. So first we'll begin with just talking about the services in general. So the career transition assistance services are to be provided to VA employees who either have been or likely to be separated from federal service due to downsizing. So the goal is to assist the VA employees in taking charge of their careers by providing them with support to find a job, whether it is in the government or the private sector. So specifically in VA and relative to any agency for their own employees, there's procedures which will be available to impacted permanent Title V, competitive, accepted service, as well as permanent Title 38 hybrid and Title 38 employees. But one key feature to mention is that the employees must exercise this individual initiative in pursuing it, both inside and out. So it takes the initiative to kind of tap into those services once the employee becomes aware of the potential or displacement. So just to see under the umbrella of the career transition and placement assistance services, you have the reemployment priority list, which is known as the RPL, and that's a list maintained for each local commuting area where VA separates employees by a RIF. And the focus of our training is these other two programs, which I mentioned, our Career Transition Assistance Program, known as CTAP, and Interagency Career Transition Assistance Program. So that'll be the focus, and we'll begin with just kind of mentioning a recent bulletin that was published in August from the Office of Human Capital Officer on the CTAP and ICTAP. So it has a bunch of frequently asked questions to add clarity, and it indicates how on VA that certain Title V hybrids and Title 38 in the accepted service serving on these permanent appointments are eligible for CTAP. So this eligibility gives priority for only those identical accepted service positions when we're talking about those. So again, just to alert you to that, there is a bunch of frequently asked questions, and it will be included as one of the references that we'll share with you at the end of the presentation. So again, I said these definitions you'll be hearing quite often: surplus, displaced employee, well-qualified, local area. We're going to go through and define those as it relates to the ICTAP and CTAP programs. So when we're talking about what is considered a surplus employee, so to meet surplus conditions, you have to fall in one of the three categories. Either the employee is a current career conditional appointment in the tenure group 1 or 2, at the GS 15 equivalent or below, and or current accepted service employee on an appointment without time limit, same equivalent, GS 15 or below, or a Title 38 employee serving on an appointment under 38 USC 7401. It's important to note that this does not apply to physicians and dentists that are in a single graded position. And the last circumstance is a current accepted service employee on a Schedule A or Schedule B appointment, again with those same requirements, and who is in an agency that is offering CTAP selection to that accepted service employee. So one of those three conditions, and in addition, an agency official notice. So this notice could be a certificate of accepted separation, which we call a CES, an agency certification that notifies the employee that they are considered surplus, or notice that the position is being abolished. So it could be any of those circumstances. In addition, a letter that notes that the employee is eligible for discontinued service retirement. So in addition to those type of appointments, that particular notice needs to meet one of those criteria as well. So now we come into the displaced employee definition. There's going to be two categories. So it's either very similar to the other, career conditional, tenure group 1 or 2, GS 15 below or equivalent, or current accepted service on an appointment without time limit. Again, same circumstances under GS 15 or equivalent, and a Title 38 serving on an appointment like the others, 38 USC 7401. So again, same kind of notice, but when we're talking about displaced, we're talking about a RIF separation notice, a possible notice of removal due to a decline for a directed assignment or transfer of function out of the local community area. It could also be any of those documents. So again, not any removal, it's removal based on the declination of those assignments or transfers of function. Okay, so again, you're going to hear local commuting area probably in every circumstance and throughout defining the eligibility and priority. So just to explain what is considered the local commuting area. So it's usually considered just a single area for employment purposes, includes any population center surrounding localities where people live and routinely travel back and forth daily. It is based on the official work site associated with the employee's position of record when they received either the displacement or the surplus notice. So that work site is generally in the location, again, where those duties are regularly performed, and is the duty station documented on their standard Form 50. And these employees can only get the selection priority when those vacancies are announced in their local commuting area, which is determined by the HRO for the jobs that is announced. And again, for this, there is no standard mileage. So you're not going to see a mile radius per se. It's going to be defined by the criteria that we mentioned. And our last definition is defining what well qualified means. So being well qualified means that candidate's level is qualified greater than minimally qualified. So meets all the qualification requirements and eligibility for the position, meets all selective placement factors, quality ranking factors, and is rated above the minimally qualified on the rating and ranking process, is physically qualified with reasonable accommodation, and could satisfactorily perform the duties upon entry. So that is what determines a well-qualified candidate in the CTAP and ICTAP eligibility considerations. Okay, so now that we covered those definitions, again, you're going to hear them throughout this presentation. I'll go into the career assistance plan. So this is intra-agency, meaning within VA. Again, it's considering the well-qualified displaced and or surplus employees who apply for vacancies in the local commuting area and meets the eligibility. So this provides a selection priority for any employee who wants to stay within their agency, and for us within VA, giving them the selection priority as long as they meet that criteria. And we're going to go over that criteria. It's important to know that VA CTAP special selection priority can be made, but it cannot be made where it would cause another VA employee to be separated by a RIF. So that is important to note. And in addition, when we come to that notification, so employees that are deemed displaced or surplus could potentially receive their notification up to 6 months prior to the effective date of that RIF. So upon that, they would already have a notice to kind of pursue whatever it is in terms of transition services or job opportunities. So again, what is required in terms of the eligibility? So again, as we mentioned, surplus or displaced, local commuting area in that vacancy. The performance rating of the employee has to be fully successful or equivalent. The job announcement, so they must apply to a specific announcement where that vacancy is either at or below the potential of the current position that they held. They meet the qualification standards and application deadlines per the announcement and considered well qualified. So now in terms of that requirement, what documentation is needed? So the documentation would be first that agency notice that we mentioned. So that could be, again, the CES, the RIF indicating surplus or displaced, the removal, but again, remember, only for refusing a job in the area, and the transfer of function to a local commuting area. So again, though one of those notices, the employee must have to provide that documentation along with their latest SF50 that has the current position, grade level, and duty location, as well as that copy of their performance appraisal documenting that they're at least fully successful. So that is the documentation they'll need to submit when applying to those positions. So when does that eligibility period end? So there's a few circumstances that would end the CTAP eligibility for the employee. So again, if they get a new career conditional appointment, or an accepted appointment without time limit in any agency, regardless of the grade or pay level, if they're voluntary or involuntarily separated from VA, or if they receive a notice rescinding or canceling or modifying the CTAP eligibility, or if they are placed into another position, whether it's permanent or time limited. Those circumstances would entail end the eligibility for CTAP for those employees. So I am going to hand it off to Amira now. She's going to cover ICTAP, selection priority, and the critical areas of the job announcement as relative to those programs.
All right. Thank you, Lisette. So as Lisette mentioned, I'm going to cover the ICTAP part of this. And ICTAP is an interagency program that gives selection priority to eligible, well-qualified, displaced, surplus employees from other federal agencies who apply for vacancies in the local commuting area. The agency must select those who apply and are eligible and well-qualified before almost any other applicant when filling vacancies outside of the agency workforce. So the difference is CTAP is for VA within that workforce, and IC is other federal agencies. Okay, so eligibility requirements for ICTAP. The person or the employee has to be a current or their last position in the competitive service. That is a career tenure group 1, which is the same as career, or career conditional tenure group 2, which is considered a career conditional. So if you see those terminologies, know that that's what it means. Career is tenure 1, career conditional tenure group 2. The person has to be considered a surplus or displaced from another agency and be within the eligibility period established if that's applicable. They have to apply to a position in the same local commuting area of the vacancy. They have to provide the most recent performance rating, at least fully successful or equivalent. Now, this requirement does not apply to ICTAP due to injury, compensation, or disability annuity. So if they are a recipient of ICTAP based on those two, that does not apply to them, the performance rating. And one other requirement is that they have to apply for a specific vacancy at or below the grade level that they are being separated from. And that doesn't, the position cannot be like a targeted grade. If they're going to apply for a position that is 11, 12, and their position that they were displaced, surplus, or whatever the reason is, it cannot be a targeted position, the one that they're applying to. It cannot be greater than what they left. They have to meet the application deadline, and obviously they have to be well qualified. I just wanted to read a note from one of the frequently asked questions that I thought was probably important to mention. Priority is given to ICTAP eligibles before filling a competitive service position through competitive examination, non-competitive appointments, transfers, and reinstatement. Some situations which the VA can fill positions without selecting well-qualified eligibles could be selections of internal VA employees, appointments of veterans with 10 point or greater hiring preference. We're not going to go too much into that, but I just wanted it to mention so it's on your radar and you can do a little bit more research on that if you come across that scenario. Now, regarding the documentation of an ICTAP employee, the federal employees seeking ICTAP eligibility, they must submit proof that they meet the requirements. And if you want to see the requirements lined up, just go to 5 CFR 330.704. By submitting a copy of the following documents with their application, and they're all on the screen and very similar to the CTAP, but I just want to make sure that we cover each one of them, okay? So the documentation that's required for an ICTAP is a copy of the notice or documentation that the individual received from their agency or other federal agency that proves that they are ICTAP eligible. And those are listed there. It could be a RIF notice where they're involuntarily separated. They are transfer of their functions have been moved to another place. Injury compensation, they're separated due to a work-related injury and their workers' comp benefits have stopped because the employee has recovered and their agency cannot place them under the RPL. which is the reemployment priority list. Another one of those notices could be a disability annuitant, which is an employee retired with a disability and their annuity has been terminated because OPM considers that the employee has recovered. And another notice that an employee could have is a RIF for retirement. Okay. The last one would be a military or National Guard technician that receives an OPM disability retirement annuity. So any of those notices, it's not all of them, but it could be one of those, okay? And obviously for documentation purposes, the person needs to also provide a copy of their most recent annual performance appraisal and a copy of the most recent 50 or their last 50 of the position that they left. And it has to include the current position that they had or they held, the grade level, and the duty location. Now, a well-qualified ICTAP eligible, they have priority over most other candidates from outside its department. Priority is given to ICTAP eligibles before filling a competitive service position through competitive examination, non-competitive appointment, transfer, or reinstatement. Now, when does the ICTAP eligibility period ends? The eligibility generally lasts a year from the date of the separation of the RIF, the removal for declining a directed geographic relocation, agency certification of non-placement, or when OPM notification of the disability annuity is terminated. Now, ICTAP eligibility ends in several situations also, including there's some that are outlined in the 5 CFR 33708, but receiving a notice that rescinds or cancels or notifies them of the eligibility, separating for any reason before the removal effective date, and being appointed if the person takes a job and they're appointed as a conditional career or accepted appointment without time limit in any agency at any grade or pay level. So if they do any of those things, it would end their eligibility for ICTAP. Now, when filling Title V positions, we all know those that are in staffing knows that their requirements. There has to be a vacancy, obviously. It has to last at least more than 120 days. And we're talking in terms of the topic that we're discussing today, CTAP and ICTAP. There has to be a discussion and initial recruitment options that need to be discussed with the hiring manager. We want to see what the area of consideration, determine if any other requirements exist according to the policy or regulations in your section, and determining or discussing if the RPL, CTAP, and ICTAP need to be cleared. And where it comes into play is if the hiring manager, the position is over 120 days and the hiring manager wants to fill the vacant position non-competitively, then job announcement is required to clear CTAP, ICTAP, or ICTAP, okay? This is something where HR needs to discuss it with the manager and ensure that this discussion is clear as to it is a requirement, okay? Now, I remember when I worked for WMC for like a year and a half, and all I did was straight Title V recruitment. And I remember that the managers had a very big file veterans that they were experts in the field and they wanted to bring them on board non-competitively. And it was almost on repeat that we would get the request, I want to hire this non-competitively, and we just had to make sure that we had the conversation and that we clear CTAP. And the way that we did it then, this is a few years back, we would just open an announcement indicating the requirements and making sure that we would clear CTAP, and we would open them between 3 and 5 days. And then once there were no CTAP or ICTAP candidates, then we could just go ahead and move on with that non-competitive selection. Now, We just talked about that there is required to have a job announcement to clear CTAP or ICTAP. And to meet the ICTAP obligation, all Title V competitive service vacancies, as I mentioned, that are more than 120 days. And for ICTAP, they have to be outside of the VA. An announcement has to be posted. And this includes those that want to hire non-competitive and you want to use direct hires and all of that. Okay. Now, the Title V positions have to be in the competitive service. So this is good to make sure that we go over. The area of consideration includes if the position is internal or external to the VA, or it could be both. You want to identify the direct hire appointment authorities and ensure that one of the most important things when you're trying to clear CTAP and ICTAP is that you want to make sure that the language, it's usually defaulted. I haven't done one in a couple of years, but I'm sure that it was defaulted then. I'm sure it's probably the same thing now, or even better. There's a default template language for ICTAP and CTAP. And on the screen is a screenshot. I know it's a little blurry, but it'll say something like career transition. And then in the clarification from the agency there, you can probably specify the different areas that this will apply to, okay? So just make sure that you don't alter the defaulted template language, and then it should be okay. And I remember that they used to check those for us, and if there was something that was altered, we would get contacted, we had to take it down, we had to correct it, and then we had to repost it again. So now, when it comes to terms of CTAP and ICTAP, there's an order of selection for filling vacancies that are open outside the VA. And it's on your screen. It's CTAP, the reemployment priority list, the ICTAP, and then it comes all of the external candidates. I know that Lisette probably mentioned this earlier, but I just want to reiterate it since we're talking about the order of selection. If an employee is not placed under CTAP, then they need to request to be registered or be added to the RPL registry. Okay, the person doesn't go on automatically. This is something that the employee needs to initiate. And each agency must maintain this list, the RPL, for each local commuting area, where it separates employees by RIF or has employees who have fully recovered from a compensable injury after more than 1 year. So very important to make sure that we let our employees know if they were to go on a drift or whatever one of these scenarios that we just went over, that they have to take the initiative. We just don't enroll them automatically. Now, the last point that we want to cover is the selection. And if when you're reviewing the candidates, qualifying them, if the HR specialist finds that the CTAP and or ICTAP employee or eligible applicant, they are not among the well qualified, they're not considered well qualified, then a documented independent second review must be conducted, and the individual must be informed of the results in writing to include the information on the independent second review. All of the adjudications must be documented in USA Staffing, in the case files, or follow the process that your section has identified for something like this or for any other selections. And with that, we have covered all that we had for this topic. We encourage you to review the references that we are going to provide at the end of this presentation. We want to make you aware. This was, even though I for myself, I had experience doing announcements to clear CTAP, ICTAP, RPLs, but actually researching the topic, there was a lot of different resources, and you're going to see it on the list that we're going to provide. So you got to make sure that you pay attention. If you're not too sure, that you go to your section leader, to your leads, and to your supervisors for their guidance as to what process to follow in your section. So just wanted to caution you guys, make you aware. We try to compile it in an easy way to follow, and I hope that it is beneficial for you guys. Okay. Now we are going to do our post test and gonna go over those 3 questions that Lisette went over at the beginning. So let's go over the response. So the ICTAP is an intra-agency program that gives selection priority to VA well-qualified displaced surplus employees who apply for vacancies in VA's local commuting area. True or false? There was a 50-50 split on the answer. So the correct response is false. CTAP, not ICTAP, is an intra-agency program. Okay, so the CTAP is for VA, and ICTAP is other federal agencies. Okay, interagency. The second question is, let me just scroll down a little so I can see everything. Okay. Being well qualified means the candidate's level of qualification is greater than minimally qualified. Is this true or false? Let's see. Oh, very good. The majority of the people responded true, and that is correct. And the last question it was, okay, let's see. If an ICTAP eligible employee moves, are they eligible for selection priority in a different geographic area? There were some people that thought true, and there's some people that thought it was false. I know we covered in one of the slides. This is false. No, if the ICTAP selection priority only applies in the local commuting area for which they were when they were separated. Okay, so if they move, then they lose that eligibility. So that is false. Okay. Thank you so much for participating. Let's go over our summary. We reviewed the federal programs available for surplus or displaced employees, which are RPL, CTAP, and ICTAP. The CTAP is for employees within the VA agency. ICTAP is an OPM program which provides special selection priority to other displaced federal employees when filling vacancies from outside the VA. We also covered employees must exercise their individual initiative if they're pursuing employment, both within and outside the federal government. They have to initiate that. Well, that's not a HR function to actually put them on the list. And then we also covered that certain Title V, hybrid Title 38, and full Title 38 accepted service employees serving on appointment are eligible for CTAP. And that was, if you want more information on that, we refer you to the OCHICO bulletin that we mentioned in one of our slides. Okay. We mentioned that before, but our PowerPoints and our classes are created only for the sole purpose of providing training for VISN HR specialists. Please know that our training courses are not intended to be a substitute for official VA guidance, references, handbooks, HR notes, or a substitute for local policy from your section. Please follow the guidance from your section as to how to do the day-to-day. We usually do an overall kind of training. Rather, this material has been developed as a supplement to any policy or guidance developed on this topic. This is not in lieu of policy or regulation, statute, nor as policy. So for guidance on specifics, as I mentioned, follow up with your SME or your leads, supervisors for your specific section. And I about to open it up. If anyone has questions, we can answer questions that we covered. If there's a question that comes up and we don't know the answer right at the moment, we'll do our research, we'll contact our SME, and then we'll go ahead and make sure that we provide an answer to the entire group. If there's any questions at this moment, let's see. I think there is a question. Interesting. We're going to have to do more research on that because the material didn't cover the virtual, but that's a really good question, Christy. The question is, if virtual in another state, how does it work regarding local commuting area and CTAP if RIFT? We will definitely have to take that question back when we were doing our research, we didn't see anything. Lisette, correct me if I'm wrong. We didn't see anything that talked about virtual, so we'll definitely
No.
contact.
No, we didn't see anything with virtual, but
Yeah.
most likely if we look at those definitions, kind of those circumstances, it lends itself to the actual physical location, but to be sure,
Yeah.
but especially with all the virtual positions that we
Yep.
have throughout the agency and VA HR alone, we will double check with our SME and get back to you. We can give that question. Can we still post it on the chat or just we individually email her?
No, we'll post it on the chat, so don't leave
Okay.
the chat, or we'll email everyone that attended
Okay.
today, so everybody can have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other question with the second level review, when an applicant is not found well qualified, oops, sorry. Who does, well, that will probably be among your section. There has to be maybe your lead, maybe your supervisor can go ahead and assign a second level review. So that's within the section and their leadership, who they decide, okay? If it was me, I would bring it up to my lead.
And when a candidate is deemed not to be well qualified, there is documentation that is required
Yeah.
to justify that, which is kept in the recruitment
Yes.
file as well.
Yes, absolutely. It has to be well documented, actually. Everywhere that we looked, it said that well documented, well documented, well documented. So Wendy, that's what I would do on that instance. There's one more question. By policy, we HR are supposed to maintain list of CTAP and ICTAP, at least CTAP since VA employees. Are we just relying on applicants to identify it when apply? Yes, the onus is on HR does have to keep the list, but the onus is put on the employee to request from HR to be put on that list. Okay.
So our responsibility is clearing the list from HR, but to be placed on the list again, like we mentioned, is the employee.
Yeah. I remember when I was doing staffing, one of the facilities, obviously we didn't have anyone. However, we did have a file that we would check that it was for RPLs, for CTAP and ICTAP, and we didn't have anyone, but we had to make sure that we checked to see if somebody had been put on there. So we did keep a record, but there was no risk, so obviously we didn't have anyone on the list. But yes, the onus is on the employee to get put on the list. Okay, where do we find any list? I have to refer you to your section of staffing. Your supervisors should know if they have a list, where it's maintained. Okay, you're welcome, Wendy. All right, if there's no other questions, we are gonna move forward. I am gonna put on the chat the reference sheet. This has all of the reference that we're just gonna mention right at the moment. There was a lot of, like I mentioned, a lot of the topic was mentioned in different chapters, different parts of the handbook. A little bit choppy, so you have to comb through the regulation. And then there's other links. Oops, sorry. There are other links and they're all on this reference sheet that I
And the
just
job
posted.
aid is a really helpful tool, which we included on there for reference.
I would reference you if you have questions. There is the job aid that Lisette is mentioning would be, if I was in staffing, that would be one of my first points of contact or reference, because it tells you the different yes and no's and what to do from the staffing point of view. Okay. So a good thing to go ahead and review. Before we go, I just want to mention something real quick. We sent it out to all of HR to make it aware. Our team works very hard in trying to put trainings together in different formats. And we do classes like this. We have some podcasts. We do some guides like the sheet that I just posted. And we do something also that's called HRD highlights with our short videos of a specific topic with just highlights of that topic. It doesn't encompass the entire training, but just highlights, things that you can just go and look at. It's between 5 and 8 minutes long, and that we prepare them for HR. And we have come up with this newsletter. One of our colleagues has put this nice newsletter. We're calling it the month update. And then the first one that we did was in October. It looks like what's on the screen. And then it has all of the links to all of the trainings that we conducted in October. And you can find all these on our HR hub. But if you go through the email, all the links are there. So we're preparing this for HR to help us, to help you, to help anyone in the HR business. I know how hard it is to research, to look for trainings, to look for things at a moment's notice when you're in a scenario. I would suggest that you take advantage of this resource that we're putting together for HR and that you share with other HR staff, okay? I'll provide the link for the HR hub. I'll provide it at the end so you can have it. If not, just go to the SharePoint for VISN 8 and make sure that you pick the correct section. There's a section for supervisors, there's a section for employees, and there's a section for HR staff. So make sure that you go under the HR staff. Okay? Without further, that's pretty much all we had. I just want to close up with mentioning who our team is composed of. We're led by Marcus James, our chief of HRD, and my colleagues are Lisette Lima, Valerie McKinney, Samantha Montalvo, Angel Torres Morales, and Luis Torres, and myself, Myra Bedward. We try to work hard for this team and for this section, and I hope that you guys are benefiting from what we are doing. If you ever have any questions, if you want to reach us, you can reach us at VISN8HRD@va.gov, and we'll get back to you. We want to ask you if you can just take a minute and go ahead and provide us a feedback about how this class went by doing the survey. And I'm going to post it. It's actually on that reference sheet, but I'm going to put it here just for ease of reference as well. And if you can just do it for us, it'll take you less than a minute. We'll appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much for attending.